With Carl Conway, you had a specific act that you knew was demonstrably false. His statement regarding Joy Phillips being that he personally observed Joy Phillips doing something wrong.
He did not personally, my understanding was that he did not personally see it. He reviewed a video, and that was the source of the information. And then he misrepresented that to during an IA.
Your office is willing to put him on the stand, but you write this letter about Joy Phillips.
No, Mr. McQuarrie, as I've talked to you, Mr. Conway had credibility issues that arose during that other unrelated event, and he was no longer a witness that would be called as soon as that happened.
Have you ever disclosed to a defense counsel that Carl Conway has a reputation for dishonesty?
Okay, Mr. McQuarrie, again, I'm not going to allow you to be the puppet for another attorney, and you know that I am represented by counsel on these very issues. Please stop doing this. This has nothing to do with Mr. Conway, as he's never been a material witness after his reputation has been affected. So he was never called, so that never had to be disclosed. And that was known at the point that this opinion came down. So please stop trying to taint this proceeding with your other agenda.
Did you take any action regarding Conway that would prevent him from serving as a police officer, as you did with Joy Phillips?
I'm done answering these questions.
Fraction of your life to wander free, but losing everything is like the sun going down on me. Don't let the sun go down on me. Although I search myself, there's always someone else I see. I just allow a fragment of your life to wander free, but losing everything is like the sun going down on me.
Ms. Becker, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate you being available, particularly while you were traveling. Does the witness need to be sworn?
Ms. Becker, do you swear or affirm that the testimony you give here will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Ms. Becker, could you just state your name for the record?
Vicki Becker.
And you are the elected prosecutor of Elkhart County?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Now, the prosecutor has no role in the internal disciplinary affairs of the Elkhart Police Department, does it?
No, no role at all.
Okay. But you attended portions of Ms. Phillips' disciplinary hearing in October 2022. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
Do you recall what portions of that hearing you attended?
I cannot give you specific portions. No, I was there for quite a bit of testimony.
If I suggested to you that you were present on October 11th, that is the first, 2022, that is the first day of the hearing, would you have reason to disagree with that?
I can't affirm or disagree. Either way, I don't know which day it was or what the status of the proceedings was. I'm sorry.
Okay. How about the second day of the hearing, which was October 25th, 2022? Uh, uh, Do you recall being present for any part of the second day of the hearing?
I'm not sure if I was present on the second day or not. It is certainly possible, as I remember sitting in two different places, but it could have been simply because after breaks I sat somewhere else. So I just don't recall. I'm sorry.
Now, this is not something you would normally do as prosecutor, is it?
No, it is not.
Okay. Oh, why did you come to that hearing?
I had information, I believe, from Ms. Rivera with the city attorney's office that Ms. Phillips was attempting to utilize a piece of evidence that was a law enforcement recording. And the underlying case, I believed, was going to be submitted for review for charges. So I was very concerned about confidential information from an investigation that had not yet been reviewed by my office being disseminated to the public, and how that may taint future evidence that would come in.
If I were to tell you that that footage was a city exhibit and not one of Joy Phillips' exhibits, would that change your recollection?
No,
Right. I'd like to go back and ask you again how you learned of this exhibit.
if I recall correctly, I had a conversation with Ms. Rivera. It could certainly have come from another source. I don't recall. All I recall is that I was concerned about a piece of evidence being disseminated to the public.
Did Ms. Rivera initiate that conversation?
I'm sure she did. I wouldn't have known, well, whomever it was. You know what? I can't say, because I can't say for sure that that was the first I heard of it, but the best of my recollection is that it was Ms. Rivera that first brought it to my attention. Again, I could be wrong.
How did Ms. Rivera bring it to your attention? Did she call you, email you, speak to you in person, something else?
Telephone call to my office.
When did that happen?
I don't recall. Sometime before the hearing.
What did you do with that information?
I decided that I wanted to see exactly what was going to happen, and so I attended the disciplinary hearing.
Did anyone else give you information about the upcoming Board of Safety hearing regarding Joy Phillips?
Prior to the hearing, I don't recall.
Did anyone from the city administration other than Ms. Rivera speak to you about it?
Not that I believe.
Did anyone on your staff at the prosecutor's office talk to you about it?
I recall having a conversation with Chief Investigator Bruton, but I believe I initiated that. I don't recall having any other conversations, but again, I could be wrong. It's been a while.
And what was that conversation about?
I told him what I was doing, and he offered to come along with me.
Prior to Ms. Rivera informing you of this exhibit at the hearing, had you had any contact with, were you familiar with Joy Phillips?
Yes,
How were you familiar with Joy Phillips?
I was aware that she was a detective for the Elkhart Police Department.
Had you worked closely with Joy Phillips in any prosecution?
I don't know what you mean by closely. She had taken part in one investigation that I was working on. And so we did interact on that, but I would not consider that to be closely.
Have you put her on the witness stand and examined her yourself as a witness?
I don't believe so. I could be wrong, but it certainly doesn't stand out in my memory.
Have you had an opportunity to observe Joy Phillips on the witness stand in a criminal proceeding, whether you were the lead attorney or anyone else?
I do have a memory of seeing her testify, but I couldn't tell you when, what case, who the attorneys were. It's very vague.
Have you reviewed Joy Phillips' work product as a detective, and I mean search warrants, reports, anything else that she produced in any case that was prosecuted by your office?
I'm sure I have at one point or another, but I could not tell you for sure or when that occurred or the case it involved.
And do you have any impressions at all about that work of Joy Phillips' work product?
I suppose I have some personal opinions just from the one case that I do remember, but I'm really not comfortable disclosing my personal opinions.
Well, what is the one case you do remember?
That was the multi-fatality traffic case up on Beardsley. Grossweiler was the last name of the two defendants.
Have there been any occasions in which Joy Phillips testified in a criminal prosecution that handled by your office in which you found her to be dishonest?
I'm sorry, could you restate that question?
Yes, ma'am. Have there been any cases prosecuted by your office in which you called Joy Phillips to testify? You or one of your deputies called Joy Phillips to testify and found her testimony to be dishonest?
I can't answer that question. I don't personally recall ever calling her to the stand myself, and I would have no knowledge of anything that, or when my deputies called her. So I can't really answer that question because if my deputies had an opinion about it, it was not brought to my attention, but I can't say that they didn't have an opinion.
Has one of your deputies reported to you that that he or she called Joy Phillips to the witness stand and Phillips' testimony was later found to be dishonest?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so.
Just to summarize, you came to the Board of Safety hearing because you were concerned that video might be played from an ongoing investigation.
I was concerned that Ms. Phillips was going to be introducing confidential information to the public.
What were you going to do at the hearing if that happened?
Just observe and make notes of it so that I would have an understanding of how that might impact a future criminal case.
Did you file anything with city legal asking them not to, or call Joy Phillips attorneys and ask them not to release this information?
I remember having a conversation with Ms. Rivera. I do not recall the details. I remember saying I did not want evidentiary video to be played. I remember having some conversation about what might be okay and what might not be okay. But I don't remember any more details than that. No, I did not contact Ms. Phillips' attorney. I did not think that that was appropriate. I was not a party in the case.
Do you know if the video was in fact played at the hearing?
I know some video was played. I do not believe that the actual evidentiary video was played.
Do you know which video was played?
No, I remember it was one of the officers' body cams. As I recall, what I could see in the video was the steering wheel of his vehicle and captured his voice. Excuse me.
Ma'am, I think you mentioned earlier that you were not present for all of the October 11th hearing.
I don't believe that I was.
Do you know what parts of it you attended?
No.
While you were,
I should say, I'm sorry, not specifically. I recall certain persons testifying, but I can't tell you what portion or what part that was.
who do you recall testifying?
I specifically recall Sergeant Denise Hauser. I recall, I believe it was Captain Whitmire at the time. I recall maybe James Rathel. I recall Sergeant Roundtree. I recall Chief Seymour speaking, but I don't know if that was testimony or not. I think it was. And I recall there were a few other people. I recall watching Joy Phillips testify, excuse me. And then I recall there was someone that testified via WebEx. I think it was Officer Young from outside.
Was there a specific evidentiary video that you were concerned about that might being played at the hearing?
Yes.
Which one? What was it?
Anything that showed the pursuit, anything that showed the scene of the reported burglary, anything that showed witness statements.
Did you ask that the hearing not be publicly broadcast?
I believe I did communicate that through the city attorney. I don't recall. I don't recall if I officially filed something, if the city attorney's office made that request and it was denied. I just don't recall. I'm sorry.
At the October 11th, 22 hearing, did you speak to anyone?
Yes.
And I, of course, mean beyond greetings and pleasantries. Did you talk to anyone about the substance of the hearing?
I'm sure I did.
Who did you talk to?
I have no recollection. I couldn't tell you to be specific.
Did you take notes during the hearing?
Not written notes, no.
Did you take any other kind of notes?
Mental notes, yes.
What were those?
I don't recall. There were several.
Okay. Ma'am, did you subsequently write a letter dated October 28th, 2022, that addressed to Chief Seymour regarding Joy Phillips?
Yes.
Would it be possible to display Chief's Exhibit Number 1? Ma'am, are you able to see Chief's Exhibit Number 1 from where you're located?
I am.
Did you write this letter?
I did write this letter, you know, the substance of it.
Well, did anyone else help you?
No, but there's a police administration stamp and an exhibit at the top that is not my writing.
Now, when did you begin writing this letter?
Sometime before October 28th or on October 28th.
Now, at the time you wrote the letter, you were not personally familiar with most of the subjects in that letter, were you?
But yes, I was. I was personally present when various officers made comments that prompted me to write the letter.
Well, in the first paragraph of the letter, you write, although I am not personally familiar with most of the subject matter about which Joy Phillips stated, so, I mean, didn't you say that you were not personally familiar with the subject matter?
You're not understanding. You asked me if I was familiar with the subject matter of the letter. Yes, I was. I was not familiar with the subject matter of the facts and opinions that she was talking about.
Okay, so you had no firsthand knowledge of the underlying events.
That is correct.
And in fact, you had really, if two different people testified in a contrary way about those underlying events, you would have no independent ability to know which version of the testimony is correct.
That is correct. Yeah, I did not have any personal well, I had not reviewed the underlying investigation. It had not been submitted for our review at that time. So that's why, you know, that part I didn't have much knowledge about. The purpose of the letter was not about that investigation. The purpose of the letter was about the concern for the reputation of dishonesty that was articulated by the officers during the hearing.
Just for clarification, you have not had an opportunity at the time you wrote the letter to review any of the recorded interviews, any of the case reports, any of the disciplinary records of Joy Phillips, anything like that?
I'm sure I had an opportunity, but it's not something that was appropriate at that point. You know, I do have access to review investigations, but I don't normally do that until they are finished and submitted to my office for review. And this one had not been submitted for review to my knowledge.
So you didn't review anything?
I did not review anything on the underlying investigation, correct?
What did you review?
When I wrote the letter,
Yes, ma'am.
I reviewed the proceedings at the Board of Public Safety.
Did you go back and look at any of the transcript or the WebEx recordings, or did you do that from memory?
I did it from memory as it was shortly after the proceedings.
And so just for clarification, you didn't obtain a copy of any of the exhibits that were used at the Board of Safety hearing?
I don't believe so. I don't recall that.
You did not interview third-party witnesses?
No, I was a personal witness.
You didn't interview Joy Phillips?
No, of course not.
You didn't speak to Mrs. Phillips' attorneys to get any of the materials they relied on in their case?
Again, that is not, the underlying subject matter of the investigation was irrelevant. My concern was with the testimony about Ms. Phillips' reputation in her community. There's two totally different things.
You did not interview any of the policemen who testified at that proceeding, did you?
No, not my place.
Nor did you inspect any of the files from the Elkhart Police Department related to the Phillips hearing, did you?
No, not my place.
Before writing the letter to Chief Seymour, did you speak to anyone at the Elkhart Police Department?
I don't remember specifically. I probably did speak to Chief Seymour verbally before I documented it in a letter, but I don't have specific memory of that.
Did you initiate the conversation with Chief Seymour, or did he?
I don't know.
What did you say to Chief Seymour, and what did he say to you?
I couldn't tell you verbatim. You know, again, this was, well, number one, this was several months ago. I remember I expressed my concern about what I had witnessed, but I could not tell you exactly the words that I said.
Would Detective Phillips have had any idea that you were contemplating writing this letter?
I have no idea.
After you attended the hearing, and just for clarification, did you speak to anyone at the department besides Chief Seymour? Any other officers?
Okay, in what time frame, about which topic?
About writing the letter, or which perhaps prompted you to write the letter?
No, nothing prompted me to write the letter other than my own obligation to disclose information about a witness's credibility and what we would have to disclose. That was entirely on me.
Once you had drafted the letter, but before you sent it, did you discuss it with anyone at the police department?
I don't believe so, but I don't know.
When an officer testifies falsely under oath, does that constitute police misconduct?
I can't answer that question. There are multiple things that could be police misconduct. That could be one of them, but there's a big difference between making a mistake versus testifying intentionally wrongfully. So I'm not going to answer that hypothetical.
How about when an officer writes false information in a report, so not under oath? Does that constitute police misconduct?
I think it could and it could not. It depends on the context of the circumstances, and you haven't given enough information for me to answer that hypothetical.
Well, can you give an example of when writing a false report would be police misconduct?
No, I'm not going to engage in your hypotheticals for you, counsel. I'm sorry.
Would you agree that an officer's removal from a unit due to allegations of misconduct must be disclosed to a criminal defendant?
Are we talking about Joy Phillips?
Not necessarily.
I can't answer that. I can't answer that, counsel.
Well, would you agree that an officer who testifies falsely under oath commits misconduct?
Not necessarily. Yes, it could be in some circumstances. It could be not in others. Again, there's a big difference between mistake, lack of memory, confusion, the way a question is formed. I've seen numerous counsel twist information and provide incorrect hypotheticals that are then used for nefarious purposes. So I think all those things go into the equation. And again, I'm not going to go down hypotheticals with you.
Now, obviously, you would not condone police misconduct.
Of course not, depending upon how you define misconduct. It's clear you and I have very different definitions for that.
Well, what is your definition of misconduct?
I'm not here to counsel you on what a legal definition is versus my own personal definition. Thank you.
As the elected Elkhart County prosecutor, you would not befriend an officer who commits police misconduct, would you?
I'm sorry, but this is getting to the point where I think you are touching on material that I discussed previously is the subject of a federal lawsuit of which I am represented, and I've already warned you twice not to question me without counsel present regarding someone else's questions.
Ma'am, these are my questions.
I'm not answering your questions on this as I am not a friend of Joy Phillips.
Now, during your time as Elkhart County prosecutor, you've learned about allegations of police misconduct, haven't you?
Of course, it's all over the headlines across the nation.
And you've probably learned about officers with a reputation for dishonesty.
Ms. Phillips, I have, yes.
How about others?
Again, I'm not going down this line with you.
Now, during your time as elected prosecutor and as and I believe you were a deputy prosecutor at Elkhart before becoming the elected prosecutor, you've probably learned about officers who have been tainted through allegations of misconduct, haven't you?
Joy Phillips. To
Any
the
others?
extent, I'm not going down this line with you.
And does your office keep a formal list of Brady officers?
I don't know what you mean by Brady officers.
Does your office keep a list of police officers that it has determined have may be compromised because they have lied under oath?
The answer to that specific question, I can't necessarily answer your specific question. From time to time, If there are officers that are deemed to have credibility issues that have to be disclosed to council, yes, there have been times where we had a list of those officers.
Where's that list?
I don't know. It's not relevant now because it's in the past.
Is that list shared with the Elkhart Police Department?
The list itself, no. The way that it would be shared with the police department is like I did with this letter regarding Joy Phillips, to put the police department on notice that our office has to make certain disclosures about credibility so that they can make decisions as they see fit about what roles a person might play in their department.
How many times have you done that as a prosecutor, inform the police department that an officer is compromised?
Several.
And how have you communicated that?
Usually it is in a letter such as the one that is here in front of me as Chief's Exhibit 1.
Who are the officers to whom you've made such, about whom you've written such letters?
I'm not going to disclose that.
Is Dustin Young one of them?
I don't know.
Isn't it your responsibility to know?
Well, I've been doing this for 25 years. It is possible that there are officers from many, many years ago that I simply do not recall. If it is recent and if it is still a concern, then yes, I would know. And Dustin Young is not someone that is any time within the last several years.
Has your office called him to testify in the last several years?
I don't know.
Between 2017 and 22, while you were the elected prosecutor, how many times did you or perhaps someone on your staff write such a letter?
I don't know. Several.
What were the allegations of misconduct in those letters?
I don't have specific memory.
Can you retain those letters if we need to subpoena them?
Nah, I don't know. I don't know how far my data systems go back. I don't know. And this is, obviously this is confidential information to the extent of investigations and persons that, if in the future they are material witnesses, disclosures would have to be made. So only if the person testified would it become information that had to be disclosed.
Was Joy Phillips about to testify in any proceeding before you're brought by your office when you wrote the letter about her?
I don't believe so. You're not understanding me. This letter was sent to Chief Seymour to put him on notice, as it's his responsibility as the chief of that department to make decisions about where to have certain officers assigned. So this was to put him on notice that the state was aware that her community, she had a reputation for dishonesty, as it was not as public as per se like a criminal prosecution. And at that point in time, she was, on staff as a detective. And so I wanted to make sure he was aware that the state would have to make these disclosures going forward. I did not publicly disseminate this letter to any other person. It was not publicly disseminated. However, my lawyers, my staff were on notice.
And this is specifically regarding your letter to Chris Seymour about Joy Phillips.
Correct.
Who else was on notice of the existence of this letter besides
I
your
don't
staff?
know. I don't know.
Did you express to Chief Seymour that you considered this letter to be confidential and did not want it made public?
No, that's not for me to make a decision. That's for him.
Now, when you wrote that letter, you knew that this would have a negative impact on Joy Phillips' career, didn't you?
No, I can't say that I did. That was up to Chief Seymour, not me.
Doesn't your letter characterize Joy Phillips as a Brady officer?
I don't use that term Brady officer. It discloses that there is a reputation of dishonesty that will follow her. And I believe if you look toward the bottom, it was very clear that until she overcomes that, then whatever she worked on needed to be corroborated by independent evidence. So it does not necessarily mean it's going to have a profound impact on someone's career.
Okay. In the letter, did you specify what Joy Phillips lied about?
I didn't say that necessarily she lied. I said that she had a reputation for dishonesty amongst her community. And so that is pretty concerning. That is what has to be disclosed. Independent, isolated events are not necessarily have to be disclosed. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but it's the reputation of dishonesty that has to be disclosed.
So you hadn't done anything to you hadn't determined that she was in fact dishonest about something.
No, again, that part's not relevant. It's whether she has a reputation for dishonesty. Whether it's true or not has no impact. It's whether she has a reputation of dishonesty that would have to be disclosed. And that's merely under what the law and what the case law has dictated over the past several decades.
Now, ma'am, you had discussed with Chief Seymour allegations of dishonesty against Carl Conway, hadn't you?
In what time frame?
This would, I believe, be in 2021.
I don't know. I don't know. I recall the specific conversation with Chief Seymour around the allegation of Joy Phillips, a timing situation, not clocking in or clocking out or something along those lines when she alleged that she had. And Conway, as her supervisor, I came to know had made a false representation that he personally observed that when that was not true. He had only observed a video. And I did have a conversation specifically with Chief Seymour about that.
And so your understanding is that Joy Phillips was actually innocent of the accusation that Conway made against her?
No, that's not the case at all. It was that Conway saw it on a video. He did not personally see it. And my understanding was his claim was that he personally saw it.
So he lied about what he observed.
I can't say that. I don't know.
But this is what the department determined and informed you of. Would that be a better way to describe it?
I don't know that it was characterized as a lie. To me, it was definitely not a truthful statement. But whether it was an intentional lie, whether it was a mistake, I can't answer that question.
Based on your conversation with Chief Seymour, did you come to believe that Carl Conway's false representations about Joy Phillips made him a Brady cop?
I don't use that term Brady cop. It definitely was a point where it was something that would affect his credibility if he were ever to be called as a material witness in a case. And I communicated that to the chief. At that point in time, if I recall correctly, Conway was already not working cases and would not have been called as a material witness.
And ma'am, by the way, I don't mean to antagonize you by repeating the phrase Brady cop. Is there a phrase, a term that you consider more appropriate or which is customarily used in your office to describe what an officer has been compromised through dishonesty?
So we refer to them as officers that have credibility issues. We always just use the phrase credibility issues.
And just to recap then, did you recognize that Officer Conway's false representations about Joy Phillips led to him having credibility issues?
Officer Conway already had credibility issues from proceedings that are completely separate from this proceeding or from that instance.
Did you write a letter to Chief Seymour about Carl Conway?
No, that wasn't it. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Similar to the one that you wrote regarding Joy Phillips?
No, Carl Conway was no longer working cases in any way. And all of his credibility issues were public knowledge because of the Court of Appeals opinion, all of the other public information. And so when someone can, when a defendant or a defense attorney can ascertain things from public record very easily, then it puts it into a different category. Even though our office still makes disclosures, it's not something that has to be documented, such as the circumstances with Joy Phillips. Joy Phillips' situation was because it was so not publicly known. I mean, it was publicly known, but it wasn't at the same scale of Court of Appeals opinion or anything like that. And that's why this one was different than the Conway situation. But Conway's credibility definitely had been compromised, and that was well known.
You referred to the Court of Appeals decision. Are you referencing State v. Royer?
I am.
And that was a case in which the Court of Appeals determined that Lieutenant Conway had lied under oath?
It is.
And
Counsel, may I interrupt and ask how much longer you expect to be?
I would think about 15 minutes, sir. I'm happy to take a break. I just want to be deferential to Ms. Becker, who is an elected official.
Very sensitive to what Ms. Becker is doing, but I think it's appropriate for us to take a short break at this time.
Yes, sir.
With my apologies to you, Madam Prosecutor.
Oh, no worries. It's fine.
Let's take 10 minutes and start again at 11 or 10:50.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
This hearing will come back to order. Where Ms. Rivera is? We'll continue now with the examination of Ms. Becker.
Ms. Becker, was it Carl Conway's false allegation against Joy Phillips that first caused Carl Conway to be considered what I've been calling a Brady cop, and what you say, what you call an officer with credibility issues?
No, it was the Court of Appeals opinion.
Okay. And do you know when the Court of Appeals decision came down?
I'm sorry, I do not off the top of my head.
Okay. If I told you it were April 8th, 2021, would you have any reason to disagree with that?
I don't have a reason to disagree with that.
Okay. Do you know when Carl Conway was terminated?
No, I do not.
Step back a minute. Do you know that he was terminated?
I do not believe that is accurate. I do not think he was terminated, but I don't know. I really don't.
What, was he allowed to resign?
I don't know.
Do you know when the false allegation occurred against Joy Phillips?
The letter that I wrote, it was
No,
October
ma'am.
of 2020. Okay.
No, ma'am. I'm sorry. I was not being clear. Do you know when Carl Conway made the false allegation against Joy Phillips?
No, I do not.
Do you know when charges were brought against Conway?
I'm sorry?
You know when disciplinary charges seeking termination were brought against Lieutenant Conway?
No, I do not.
If I were to tell you that was September 10th, 2021, would you disagree with that?
I have no reason to disagree.
So it was after the Court of Appeals decision came down.
I am sure it was, yes.
And I believe you testified earlier that you never wrote a letter regarding to Chief Seymour regarding Carl Conway.
I did not write a letter to Chief Seymour regarding Carl Conway. Again, that would not be a standard practice when things are as public as the situation involving Mr. Conway was.
Did anyone ask you to write such a letter?
No one asked me to write such a letter like I wrote for Ms. Phillips. Chief Seymour did want me to write something regarding Detective Conway, but I did not agree with how he was characterizing things, and I refused to do so.
What was he characterizing incorrectly?
I'm not sure. What does this have to do with Joy Phillips?
Well, you did write a letter for her, but you didn't write one for Carl Conway, who's been determined by the Court of Appeals to provided false testimony. I'm looking for the distinction.
As I indicated previously, the distinction is that when things are very publicly known, there is no obligation of a prosecutor to have to disclose those kinds of things because they are so readily known. And that is based upon decades of case law as well as, other things that are applicable in the law. When things are not as well known or it's not as easily able to be found, then the state absolutely has to disclose those things. So that's what discriminates the two situations. And since the Board of Public Safety hearings, whatever they were, the Board of Public Safety, I believe, hearings were not widely disseminated, the state felt it was necessary to put Chief Seymour on notice that we would have to make these disclosures going forward, but also to basically indicate that there were ways around it.
Wasn't it readily known about Joy Phillips? I mean, that hearing was public, the same hearing that you attended.
Right, but just because something like that is public does not necessarily mean that all defense attorneys are aware of it or should be aware of it. Legal opinions, criminal prosecutions, those are things that defense attorneys are absolutely impugned to be aware of. But a administrative hearing like the Board of Public Safety, quite frankly, I'm not aware of any other defense attorneys that participated or were aware of what was going on other than, perhaps people that Ms. Phillips had told. That's why I felt it was so necessary to write the letter.
What did you know that Joy Phillips said that was a lie?
I can't necessarily say that anything that Joy Phillips said was a lie. From what I observed from Ms. Phillips' testimony, she was talking about a lot of legal principles that were very inaccurate understandings of the law, which in and of itself isn't that big of a deal. It just, demonstrates lack of legal training. But in the grand scheme of things, I couldn't sit here and tell you factually one thing was a lie or was not. I simply have no knowledge or interaction with Ms. Phillips to that degree.
Then what basis do you have to call Joy Phillips a Brady cop?
I don't. As I indicated in the letter, I have to put the chief on notice that it is very clear that her community, in other words, the police community at Elkhart Police Department, holds that she has a reputation for dishonesty, and that is what has to be disclosed. It is not a comment on whether or not she has credibility issues other than that, or whether what she said is or is not truthful. It is exclusively that she has a reputation for dishonesty, and that has to be disclosed. Therefore, if she was to be called as a material witness in any case whatsoever, this is something that would be subject to cross-examination and needed to be disclosed. She could overcome that by the department could overcome that by making sure that anything that she did was documented or corroborated by independent evidence. For example, like audio video recordings, things like that, so that her credibility was not as necessary if she had to be called as a witness.
So your concern with Joy Phillips was not that you knew anything that she said was false. It's just that other officers in her department disagreed with some of her testimony.
So the purpose of the letter and the disclosure, as I've indicated, was because we have to make a disclosure about a reputation for dishonesty. It is specific instances of conduct under the rules of evidence are not permitted anyway in a court of law for purposes of cross-examination or showing bias. So specific instances of conduct are not things that I was as worried about. As I indicated in the letter in the opening paragraph, I did have concerns about what she was articulating to be facts, because I was observing multiple people testify very inconsistently to facts that Ms. Phillips was testifying to. So while I had concerns about that, I was not going to go so far as to say that what she was saying was not truthful, but I was concerned. Again, the purpose of the letter was to disclose we had to now make disclosures about the reputation of dishonesty because that is what is required under the law.
So your letter did not contend that Joy Phillips said anything untrue?
Well, it does say that her, quote, facts different than what other people were saying, but that's as far as it goes on that topic. My letter was focused on the reputation for dishonesty in her community.
Is it fair to say that you came to believe that Mr. Conway's representations that he personally observed Joy Phillips do something wrong were demonstrably false?
I don't understand your question. Are you saying, what are you saying?
You, with Carl Conway, you had a specific act that you knew was demonstrably false. His statement regarding Joy Phillips being, that he personally observed Joy Phillips doing something wrong.
He did not personally, my understanding was that he did not personally see it. He reviewed a video and that was the source of the information. And then he misrepresented that to, during an IA. And your understanding is that Joy Phillips did not actually do anything wrong in that underlying incident? No, that is not my understanding at all, but I have not researched that because that's not something that, quite frankly, I care about.
Okay. So your concerns with Joy Phillips' credibility are not based on any knowledge that she actually said something untrue or did something wrong?
As I indicated in my letter, the opening paragraph does document that I do have concerns about what she testified to in light of all of the contradictory evidence. However, that was not my purpose for the letter. And quite frankly, as I indicated previously, specific instances of conduct are not generally admissible as evidence in cross-examination. However, a reputation for dishonesty is, and a reputation for dishonesty must be disclosed unless it is very publicly and commonly known. Hence the reason for my letter, to put the chief on notice that we would have to disclose a reputation for dishonesty in her community.
So if in the course of the Board of Safety hearing, other officers lied regarding Joy Phillips, you not only would have no way of knowing that, but you wouldn't even be concerned about it.
I'm not going to say I wouldn't be concerned about that.
All you cared about was that they seemed to disagree with Joy.
No, you're completely misrepresenting what I'm trying to tell you. There was, in a public hearing, multiple individuals in supervisory roles that testified to the extent that one would infer reasonably that Ms. Phillips has a reputation for dishonesty in her community. Whether or not that is true does not change the need to disclose it, because it is publicly stated and it was very clear what those officers were saying. That has to be disclosed. That is what I did. It does not go so far as for me to try to rehabilitate her. That is not my role. I simply have to make sure that we would make a disclosure about these things that were testified to, so that if she were called as a material witness, they would be subject to cross-examination on those facts.
But you cannot say what Joy Phillips was dishonest about specifically.
No, I have no personal knowledge about the facts and circumstances that were the underlying subject matter of those hearings. So I can't go there, and I'm not going to. It's not my place to determine whether or not she was accurate in her facts or not.
Then how could you write that letter? How could you say that Joy Phillips has no credibility to testify in court because of a reputation for dishonesty when you have no knowledge whether she said anything that was untrue?
Mr. McQuarrie, I'm sure you are familiar with the rules of evidence, and I'm sure you're familiar with the rules of cross-examination. A reputation for dishonesty is grounds for cross-examination. Specific instances of conduct are not. Therefore, the reason I wrote the letter was to put Chief Seymour on notice that they're her supervisors and they were testifying that she had a reputation for dishonesty in her community. It does not require that I have public or personal knowledge about the underlying facts and circumstances of that subject investigation. It merely was that I was a witness and I observed that her supervisors believed that she had credibility issues. That is a problem, and that is what I have to disclose. I don't make the rules. I simply, follow as best as I can.
So you can write a potentially career-destroying letter saying that someone is dishonest without knowing that the person actually said anything untrue.
Mr. McQuarrie, you have that letter. I did not say that she is dishonest. I said I have to make these disclosures if she is a material witness. Anything that she is a witness to has to be corroborated by independent evidence until such time as she overcomes that reputation. That is possible. And to me, this is not a career ender. This is something that a chief has to use to make decisions about what assignments to put an officer in until such time as they overcome or rehabilitate themselves. And that is purely an administrative issue for the police department. It is nothing about which I have any control.
And yet you called Carl Conway to testify at trial.
I never called Carl Conway to testify at trial about Joy Phillips. There hasn't been a trial.
But you were willing to put him on the witness stand.
No, there has not been any trial or any case where he's a material witness involving these events.
But involving other events. Your office is willing to put him on the stand, but you write this letter about Joy Phillips.
No, Mr. McQuarrie, as I've talked to you, Mr. Conway had credibility issues that arose during that other unrelated event, and he was no longer a witness that would be called as soon as that happened.
Have you ever disclosed to a defense counsel that Carl Conway has a reputation for dishonesty?
Okay, Mr. McQuarrie, again, I'm not going to allow you to be the puppet for another attorney, and you know that I am represented by counsel on these very issues. Please stop doing this. This has nothing to do with Mr. Conway, as he's never been a material witness after his reputation has been affected. So he was never called, so that never had to be disclosed. And that was known at the point that this opinion came down. So please stop trying to taint this proceeding with your other agenda.
Did you take any action regarding Conway that would prevent him from serving as a police officer, as you did with Joy Phillips?
I'm done answering these questions.
In fact, you didn't take any action regarding to him comparable to the action you took with Joy Phillips.
The circumstances are completely different. Ms. Phillips was still a detective. Ms. Phillips could have rehabilitated her her reputation, and Ms. Phillips could have been called as a material witness in the future. Mr. Conway was not.
I have no further questions. Thank you, ma'am.
Any cross?
None.
Ms. Becker, thank you very much for taking your time and appearing today. We very much appreciate what you've said here. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.